All right, good stuff with Pat Murphy from Bucknuts 247 Sports talking Ohio State football. The NFL draft concluded over the weekend. Ohio State and Alabama to complete the loop as well, tied for the most NFL draft selections with 10. So Justin Fields, the long national nightmare and emergencies over. We know where he's going. Hopefully he will get the level of support that he needs to be a successful quarterback in Chicago. That's been a difficulty in recent years in terms of offensive line and playmakers. So first pick for the Bears, 11th overall. Your thoughts about Justin Fields' transition to Chicago?
I think this is a good spot for Justin Fields, for a few reasons. I think there's talent there. They added some offensive linemen, which that was my first reaction when he was drafted was he's going to be running for his life. Well, they addressed that to some degree in the draft. So that's a positive. But then, you kind of dig into it a little bit more. And we spoke with general manager Ryan Pace after the selection. And, he said he's seen Justin Fields play live a couple times. Being in Chicago and Big Ten country, he was able to go to some games. In particular, the Michigan game 2 years ago where Justin Fields gets hurt and comes back into the game was one that he attended in person. He then pointed out that head coach Matt Nagy and Ryan Day have a long relationship, which Ryan Day then explained to us goes all the way back to when they were playing against each other in college and have kept in touch. Obviously, both guys are offensive minds who came through the NFL at about the same time. And then you have kind of the situation similar to the one in Kansas City where Matt Nagy was the offensive coordinator, where they have a quarterback in Andy Dalton. They also have Nick Foles on the roster. So Justin Fields doesn't have to come in and immediately be the guy. Now, they haven't ruled that out either. If he wins the job, it's his to take. But as of now, they said Andy Dalton's the starter, and they want to handle that similar to the way the Kansas City Chiefs handled Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes during Patrick Mahomes' rookie year. Now, that's not to say Justin Fields is going to be an MVP in 2 years and a Super Bowl champion in 3, but having a guy who helped kind of come up with that plan now as your head coach, plus a good coaching staff, some veteran quarterbacks around you to help kind of mentor you early on, I think it's a really good spot. And, I think he'll have time to show what he can do. And, like I said, if he wins the job day one, great. But if he doesn't, I think that, may end up being a best case scenario to kind of slowly work your way and develop into a true NFL quarterback.
Got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports, breaking down the NFL draft on the Ohio State side with the 10 selections, including the second of the 10, which is quite the surprise, at least for me leading into draft week. But then the more I heard in the days leading up to the draft, I wasn't surprised necessarily once the selection was made. But Pete Werner, coming off 47 games and 35 starts at Ohio State, gets selected by the New Orleans Saints in the second round.
We talked last week about Pete Werner, and you said the same thing, that you were a little surprised to hear the name brought up so much. I was surprised at how high he went. I thought he'd probably be a third round guy. Late second round isn't far off, I guess. But Pete Werner's versatility is going to be big in the NFL. His ability to play either outside linebacker positions, also cover to some degree. He did that at Ohio State. I think is appealing to teams, and obviously, the New Orleans in Columbus, some nicknamed the New Orleans Buckeyes or Ohio State South. Very familiar with this program, the defensive players that they produce. So, I think they saw a guy that they liked that could do several different things at that linebacker position, and it comes from a program that they trust. So, they like the fit there, and now it'll be up to Pete to find a role and make the most of it.
The Green Bay Packers found a good offensive lineman a few years ago that has stayed with them and been a cornerstone of what they've done in front of Aaron Rodgers, even though that may not last for long going forward. But Corey Linsley, and here we've got Josh Myers going in the second round to the Packers at pick number 62.
Yeah, and actually Corey Linsley left this year in free agency out to the Chargers, I believe. I think he's the highest paid center in the NFL now. So a hole there to some degree that the Packers have to fill. And Josh Myers was asked about that after he was selected. He said, he knows Corey Linsley from seeing him around the facility when he's back in town. He's familiar with his play, having watched the Packers. So, he's excited to have the chance to fill that role. 2-year starter, a captain at Ohio State. He talked about wanting to be a leader for the Packers as his career progresses. So, I think it's an interesting fit there. You go from one Ohio State center who wasn't originally a center to another one who wasn't originally a center, Josh Myers, who moved to that position early in his Ohio State career. So, a lot of similarities there, which is interesting, and we'll see how he does in Green Bay.
We'll stay along the offensive line with Wyatt Davis, and the Minnesota Vikings have a long, long history of Ohio State Buckeyes excelling with that franchise as well, as we take it to the third round and pick number 86 for Wyatt Davis.
I had expected Wyatt Davis to go earlier than this. I think a guy who was a unanimous All-American last year, I thought he would be a second-round guy, so I think the Vikings got a really good pick. Maybe the injury at the end of last year scared some teams off a little bit. He did do some work at Pro Day, but wasn't 100% at that point. I didn't think that was a huge deal because he was able to work out at Pro Day. But a guy who really came in 2-3 years ago when Demetrius Knox got hurt against Michigan, made his first 2 starts in the Big Ten championship game in the Rose Bowl, which was Urban Meyer's last game he coached at Ohio State. So thrown to the fire really, and never looked like a player that was overwhelmed. And obviously went on to have a great next 2 years. So I really think that the Vikings got a steal here. He's somebody that I think will be on that offensive line for a long time to come.
I don't necessarily know if we ever got a straight answer out of Trey Sermon, or if he even knows what happened to him the final 2 games of his career, because he was always a really good back. And maybe you extend that out to 3 games because the Michigan State game gets under-publicized for obvious reasons, but he really broke out with 100-plus yards in that game. And then in rewatching, as you have, I'm sure, a number of times, the Northwestern and Clemson games, my goodness, it was like the guy was possessed. He was just like throwing guys off of him, and he just ran angry and just did everything to gain yardage like it was the last carry of his life, each and every attempt. So he goes to San Francisco off again. Stellar career with 29 touchdowns, 6.5 yards per carry, 3rd round to the 49ers.
Yeah, I think he's a guy who probably would have gone even higher if not for the strange Big Ten season. He talked about last year, especially late in the year, that early in the season he just didn't have a rhythm with the offense, with the offensive line, because they didn't have a normal preseason camp. He wasn't able to work with guys during the summer like he normally would have, transferring over from Oklahoma. So, I think obviously the Big Ten championship game, he rushed for 331 yards. That's an extreme, right? But you saw the talent really emerge, and it would have been very interesting to see him play against Alabama in the national championship game. Obviously, gets hurt on that first play. But I think this may be my favorite pick from the Ohio State guys of the draft in terms of fit. San Francisco is a team that uses a lot of running backs. They like to throw to their running backs, use them in different ways. As a Los Angeles Rams fan, I was not happy to see Trey Sermon go to the 49ers because I think he'll be another weapon that they'll use in the NFC South or NFC West. Sorry. So, I think this is a great fit for him. Like I said, he'll be part of a committee, so he won't have to be the guy, but can work his way into a bigger and bigger role here in his rookie year and beyond.
Should I take a shot as to guessing how you became a Los Angeles Rams fan?
Well, I grew up in St. Louis, and they were
Bam.
there. Yeah, and
there we go.
Yeah,
so I was either thinking that was going to be my guess. My second guess was just you were enamored with the, greatest show on turf, regardless of where you lived, and you latched onto that. But being from St. Louis, that's very understandable. No question about that. Baron Browning, a pretty productive career later in his tenure with the Buckeyes, goes to Denver, 3rd round, pick number 105, 19 tackles for loss, 7 sacks for Browning.
I think it'll be very interesting to see where Baron Browning plays during his NFL career, because he was an outside linebacker last year for Ohio State, played kind of that hybrid spot for the Buckeyes that Pete Werner played the year before, so showed some versatility, but has also shown several times that he can rush off the edge, almost like a defensive end. Did some defensive end work at Ohio State's Pro Day, so he's a guy that could fit a number of different roles, and it's just about finding that best spot for him that I think will be interesting here in the NFL. But certainly a talented player, a coach's son, so he understands the game really well. He's a guy I think will have a long career. It's just finding that right role I think will be interesting.
Got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts, 247 Sports. So head on over there, check out his work covering Ohio State athletics there at Bucknuts. So we're running down the Buckeyes draftees, 10 in all for this past weekend's NFL draft. Tommy Togiai would be a guy that if you just base his draft selection based on his productivity and his dominance at the line of scrimmage over the back half of his career, or certainly his final season plus at Ohio State, you would think that he would have been drafted higher. But he goes to the Cleveland Browns, round number 4 at pick 132.
I have a lot of Cleveland Browns fans that are friends of mine living in Columbus, and I'm sure there's plenty that are watching this. I was really impressed with what the Browns have done all offseason with this draft, and getting Tommy Togiai to add to what's already a good defensive line. I thought was a steal at that point in the draft. He's a guy who, has been known for being the strongest guy on Ohio State's roster. And sometimes those guys put up big bench press numbers and stuff. They're more strength and don't have the versatility to play, in the NFL on a defensive line. Togiai is not that guy. And, I think you saw that last year when he really emerged. And I think maybe that scared some teams off, just looking at the numbers and maybe not doing as much homework on a guy who's going to go a little bit later. But I think this is a great pick for the Browns. Like I said, that's already a good offensive line that just got a little bit better with a player like that.
NFL draft analysis from the Ohio State contingent, courtesy Pat Murphy from Bucknuts 247 Sports. 34 catches out of a tight end for the career, not for a season. 4 touchdowns isn't necessarily a draft-worthy status elsewhere, but Ohio State, that seems to be pretty much the norm. Don't use the tight end in the passing game much, but they still get drafted.
Yeah, and especially when your former head coach is the one doing the drafting, with Luke Farrell heading to Jacksonville. Obviously, Urban Meyer, the new head coach there. To me, I thought this was a little bit early. You probably could have gotten Farrell in one of the last 2 rounds, but I think Urban knew what he had in Luke Farrell, knew what he wanted out of that position, went out and got his guy. I think you go back and look at what Ohio State tight ends did under Urban Meyer. He'll still catch some passes, and he can definitely do that, but definitely more of a blocker. Kevin Wilson, before the draft, Ohio State's offensive coordinator, called him the best blocking tight end in the draft. Obviously a little biased there, but will certainly provide some of that. Plus, the ability to pop out and make a big catch when you need him for the Jaguars.
Now we come to a player that, and this is the first word that comes to mind, and I never use this word, but the mercurial Shaun Wade, just a very enigmatic career there at Ohio State, and we'll see if it comes down to simply slot corner elite, wide corner on the outside marginal. There was much debate and discussion concerning Shaun Wade when that selection was made and preceding, because I believe Mel Kiper in particular had him so far further up the board to be drafted. But he finally goes to the Baltimore Ravens at pick number 160 overall in the 5th round after picking off 6 passes with the Buckeyes.
This is another guy that surprised me how much he fell. And even all the talk about Shaun Wade's season last year and can he play outside corner, by the 6th round, if you're not okay taking a guy who proved to be an elite slot corner, I don't know what you're looking at. If you need that, obviously, I think it's a good fit with the Ravens. A team that continues to draft well. We had a thread going on our message boards on Bucknuts throughout the draft, talking a lot of Browns fans, a lot of Bengals fans, some Steelers fans, and a couple Ravens fans in there, and no one in that division be other than the Ravens fan this pick went in. They've already said they're going to use him as that nickelback slot corner at least to start, and I think that's a good place for him. I still think he can be an outside corner. I just think he needs more reps at that position. Whether he gets them in the NFL or whether he makes it a home in kind of that nickel slot position, we'll see. But Baltimore's a good place to kind of learn, and always one of the better defenses in the NFL.
Yeah, and there are certain organizations that when they make a selection that some people may question, you generally just trust that organization, and Baltimore certainly right on that short list. And again, when I say mercurial, that speaks more to the coverage and the perspective on Shaun Wade necessarily, more so than himself and his approach to the game. Denver goes back to take another Ohio State player here with Jonathan Cooper going in the 7th round, just a few picks near the end of the draft after he notched 15 tackles for loss and 10 sacks. And his career, of course, with the Buckeyes goes all the way back to 2016.
This was one of my favorite guys to cover during his time at Ohio State. Just great personality, obviously a good player, was probably consistently overshadowed by other defensive ends that Ohio State had, Nick Bosa, Chase Young. I mean, even Sam Hubbard, Tyquan Lewis during his first couple of years at Ohio State. So I don't know if he ever quite lived up to I think he was the 3rd ranked weak side defensive end in the country coming out of high school. But, a guy that loved the Buckeyes, he's a local kid, was just a lot of fun to cover. So as he's not getting picked, I think 2 long snappers ahead of him, I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit because he is a good player and whatnot. So I'm happy to see that he did get drafted. It looked like for a while maybe he would be an undrafted free agent. He'll join Baron Browning and a few other guys out in Denver. So a nice little Buckeye contingent kind of developing out there. And Jonathan Cooper, I think, will help add to that.
And it's always interesting for those that focus strictly in college football to see the star power not necessarily translate or the productivity not necessarily translate, because, of course, the NFL is looking for those things, certainly the productivity on tape, but you factor in everything else that they like or dislike about particular profiles, measurables off the field that have to do with size and speed and quickness and space and those sorts of things. And it doesn't necessarily, again, translate to what we thought of those players and their productivity at the college ranks. Pat Murphy joining us to talk Ohio State football. In regards to the undrafted free agents, there's a number of them. You can pick and choose as you will, just in regards to their readiness for the next level and who may stand out.
Yeah, Justin Hilliard's the one for me out of the guys who signed from Ohio State. A linebacker who was a 5-star kid coming out of high school. You talk about Jonathan Cooper being here since 2016. Hilliard goes back even a year further than that. Injuries after injuries, 2 bicep tears in back-to-back years, had an Achilles injury, finally kind of got going for Ohio State these last couple of years. And, another kid who was a lot of fun to cover, never gave up, always, had this dream of being in the NFL. It's unfortunate that you didn't hear his name called, but he's a guy I think can go in, ended up with the 49ers. So he'll hot out there with Trey Sermon. He's a guy I think could go in and surprise some people. I don't know if he becomes a regular contributor, a starter, but I do think he's a guy who can make a team and make people happy. Tuff Borland signed with the Minnesota Vikings. I'll be interested to see how his talents translate to the NFL. Obviously, he was a guy who Ohio State fans got on a lot for a lack of athleticism and whatnot in the NFL. Jake Hausman, the tight end, signs with the Detroit Lions. Never was really able to turn into even Luke Farrell type. Just didn't have as many reps. Got passed up on the depth chart by Jeremy Ruckert. So, I'll be interested to see if he sticks around with the Lions. And then kicker and punter Blake with the Tennessee Titans and Drew Chrisman going home to the Cincinnati Bengals. So, those guys are, move around a lot, those positions, but, a lot of times you get the opportunity early on as a rookie being a kicker, a punter. So it'll be interesting to see what their role is for those 2 teams.
Yeah, it seems like 2/3 of the NFL teams on a yearly basis, and because the accuracy bar in the NFL is so high, if you miss a couple of kicks, you better hit 85% of your kicks pretty much these days, or man, we'll grab the next 23-year-old that's out on the waiver wire and give him a shot for a few games. So those opportunities definitely do exist. And again, as you know, Pat, I don't know where it is down the list of drafts selections in terms of rounds, but at a certain point, it's almost better that you don't get drafted and then you receive the 8 to 10 phone calls and you can weigh your options and look at rosters and opportunities and pick your own landing spot as opposed to being in a situation that may not be the best for you.
Yeah, and you see it a lot, I think, and not a lot, but you see undrafted free agents. I would be willing to bet on rosters because of the fit, stick around longer than maybe 6th, 7th round guys. Now that's not always the case. Sometimes it works out and, you always hope it works out for guys, but definitely late in the draft, I think being able to pick your spot, even though you don't hear your name called, can oftentimes work out a little bit better for your career.
People point to injuries being the major factor why NFL careers only last 2.5 or 3 years. And I know that has a lot to do with it, but rarely do people take this into consideration. We just had 260 players drafted. 75 or 80% of them are going to make rosters. Then you've got all these undrafted guys, and a number of them are going to make rosters. You're supplanting in a league with 50 some players, 53 per team, 32 teams, about 1,600 players. Regardless of the injuries, you're supplanting like 400 or 500 of them right out of the gate.
Right.
So that has more to do with it than the injuries, in just regards to, hey, we've got a cheaper option here, and he's also younger and ready to go. And so it's a difficult thing keeping a roster spot in the NFL. Pat, we appreciate you stopping by as always, and everybody join Pat's work at Bucknuts 247 Sports.
All right. Thanks for having me.